And that level of ambition and audacity really opened my eyes to the idea that you can build businesses of significance that can really have an impact on a huge number of people.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner. Greetings, I'm your host Paul Spain, futurist and chief executive at Gorilla Technology. I love to see individuals and their organisations thrive. The New Zealand Business Podcast is all about this, through sharing the business, leadership and innovation learnings of our most incredible people to educate and inspire all of us so we can do better in New Zealand and on the global stage. In this episode, I'm speaking with Aaron Ward, co-founder and chief executive of Huckleberry, who is well known as having co-founded and led AskNicely, a customer experience platform that serves over 1,000 organizations globally and has raised just shy of $50 million across multiple capital raising rounds. Aaron's journey is one of perseverance, bold ideas, and hard-earned lessons as he shares insights about his transition from finance to startup founder, including building his first companies, learning from missteps, and finding global success with AskNicely. He talks openly about how ambition, resilience, and the right partnerships played key roles in that journey, and why positive feedback is the secret fuel for both customers and employees. Aaron also talks about what has inspired him to launch his latest venture, Huckleberry, leveraging the power of feedback to transform leadership and teamwork in the modern workplace. The New Zealand Business Podcast is proudly brought to you by 1NZ and Gorilla Technology. Contact Gorilla when you're ready to boost productivity and growth with information technology. Aaron Ward, great to have you on the podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, awesome, Paul. It's great to be here. Great to be in the country.
Real privilege to have you on the show, and thanks for taking time while you're visiting New Zealand. I always like to start at the beginning, so tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what those childhood years looked like for you.
Yeah, totally. Well, you say visiting New Zealand. Of course, I'm from here, and that is a point of pride for me. But living now in the US, I do count as a visitor when I come, and I have to tick that box at New Zealand Customs, which is tricky. But so from New Zealand, born in Wanganui. I whakapapa back to Ngāti Maru in Thames, but spent most of my time in New Zealand, at least in Auckland. Grew up on the North Shore, and much of my early career kicking around Auckland.
Yeah. And what did those childhood years sort of look like? Were there, inspirations around that stood out? Were there things that you ended up sort of doing as a youngster that would have, given a little bit of insight into where you would end up in terms of as a founder and entrepreneur?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's sort of tempting to try and look back and say, okay, well, how did the dots connect?
Yeah.
Well, I guess for me, growing up, we're in a very sort of working class family. My father was a panel beater, fixed up broken cars. My mother, worked in a variety of sort of admin roles, and we had to have two parents working to sort of make ends meet. And I think if I think back to early childhood, it was everything was pretty sparse, but not that it's felt that way to me. I mean, you're just a kid doing your thing. I lived in Auckland. There was a beach down the road. It was pretty magical. Maybe one thing that stood out to me is my dad, as a panel beater, ran his own panel beating shop, and in his own way, he was actually quite entrepreneurial. He always had ambitions for more for his family and wanted to break certain molds, and and I think that stood out to me. I remember one day, oh goodness, I would have been 10 or 11, and I spent the day. I was sick off school, I think, and I spent the day working with him. And I remember him sort of pulling me aside and saying, "Hey, boy, I think it's important that you know that you can be whatever you want to be." And for some reason, that just stuck with me.
Yeah.
I think you probably also realised that I had zero practical hands-on skills. I was never very much help inside his panel beating shop, and my destiny had to probably had to do with something I could use my brain a little bit more for. So I guess he was hopeful that I would find out what that was.
So That's interesting. So he was an entrepreneur and a business owner in his own right, because that takes some guts for anyone to start and run a business, and there would have been a lot on his plate, more than just the panel beating itself.
Yeah. It brings all sorts of pressures and strains. I think you say guts is a essential ingredient. I would agree with that. I would also say there's a sort of a minimum level of insanity as well to go out there and create something new when you don't know what it's going to take. He was the first in his family to go out and sort of build a business, and he didn't have anything like any sort of training or education or coaching along the way. He was genuinely one of those people that sort of worked it out as he went, and hit wall after wall, and had the perseverance and resilience to be able to sort of keep going despite getting knocked back and told all the way along that it wasn't for him, and that this wasn't the type of thing that he should be doing. So I think maybe looking back, some of that stuff might have rubbed off for me.
Yeah. So you'd have conversations, or you'd hear about some of the challenges of business at home?
Yeah, I don't know that I would say I had many long, deep conversations with my dad, but I was, I saw what he did.
Yep.
But I also saw how it affected him as well, and how it affected other parts of his life, and family life, home life, and so there's two sides to those coins.
Yeah.
And but those things stood out to me as well.
Yeah. And did that leave you with some lessons, that impacted and helped you decide how you wanted to be a business owner yourself in the future?
Well, I don't know that I started off with the idea that I wanted to be an entrepreneur or a business owner. And I think I just felt like I needed to go and get a job, And so, the truth of it for me was that's how I started. And it's funny now, having gone through, various cycles of starting and building businesses of different flavors, I can see a number of the experiences that my father had, and probably more on the tricky side of the coin, repeated in my own experiences. So I don't know that I necessarily, learned the lessons that he did early on. I had to go out there and make a number of those mistakes myself.
Yeah, sometimes we do, for it to really stick and become evident, right? You can maybe listen to a podcast or see somebody else that goes through something, and it doesn't necessarily stick until the reality kind of hits for
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I can say confidently, I never made the same mistake twice. I made them 3 or 4 or 5 times, right?
Yeah, so true. So when did you end up leaving school, and what did that journey then look like post school?
Yeah, so I stayed through till in the old numbers. I don't know what that's called nowadays.
Yeah, 13, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but my secondary school, when I was 15, we did school certificate back in my day, and I remember getting phone calls at that time from a number of my aunties saying, "We heard you finished 5th form, well done," and they weren't congratulating me for my marks in my exams. They were congratulating me because I was the first in the family to make it through to the end of that year. Of course, there are 2 more years left in New Zealand high school.
Yeah.
But it just as a sort of a marker of the expectations around me and the patterns in our family is, that was regarded as some measure of success. And I wasn't a great student, but I did do well in math. And I remember my old man looking at my report card and found the one good mark that I had around math, and he said, "Well, okay, this means that you need to be an accountant," which I think is pretty weak logic nowadays. Math equals accountancy. But in his panel beating business, he had an accountant, and his accountant had a nice car, and he equated that to a worthwhile career where people are working with money, therefore they must be able to make some money, and that would be a good direction for me. And so that was the feedback that I took at that stage in life to go off and pursue a career in finance. I went and studied accounting and finance, and had a number of roles in that area to sort of kick off my career before I realised that was not the best direction for somebody like me.
Yeah, it's probably common logic, as I remember at one stage and I can't remember what led to it, but I had this thought I was going to be an accountant because probably because I was good at maths, but that soon disappeared.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, hopefully the world has moved on, but at that time, the careers that people that my father looked up to were accountant, lawyer, doctor. Those were the choices. And it's interesting, the drunkard's walk that we go on in our career. You ask people, like, how did you end up in the role that you're in? And invariably people say things like, well, I just sort of stumbled into it. And it seems crazy to me, right? Like, how do you, is that how life is supposed to work? That, we're just supposed to sort of hit wall after wall like a little Roomba vacuum cleaner, trying to find some sort of path forward, and we stumble into the right thing for us. But it also, I think, speaks to just the importance of feedback from others. I pursued this career in finance because my old man said I was good at math. He was the one person that provided some feedback to me, and I acted on that feedback, and off I went in that direction. And so I guess it just speaks to this idea that you can't be what you can't see. My dad had seen an accountant, therefore that was the best option that he was aware of. He was the one person that provided me some feedback. That's where I went.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to do a far better job for kids now, right, in terms of helping them see and seize the full range of possibilities that are open to them. What would our world be if people, if kids actually could latch on to the thing that they were not just good at, but they were excited about, and be able to pursue careers that help them, utilize both their strengths and their passions.
Yeah.
And what would that do for us?
Yeah, it makes a big difference, doesn't it? So those first jobs you did in the world of finance, when you look back, were there some lessons that you were able to take away into the rest of your career? Were there some tough times or challenges or lessons that sort of stood out?
Well, I think luckily for me, and I deserve zero credit for this, but there was a thread through the early roles that I held. So the companies that I were in were all reasonably early stage. They're in their first sort of 1, 2, 3 years of their existence. So they were growing. They had ambition and boldness around what they're looking to achieve. And particularly in the first couple of companies that I worked in, they had really sort of charismatic leaders. I think the nature of a startup is you have to be able to paint a vision that's really motivating beyond what exists today, which often is not.
Yeah.
And that quality in a leader is not as common, but it was a feature of the places that I worked with. And I just found myself just getting drunk on the inspiration that came, that just sort of that these leaders exuded. And I found myself just really wanting to follow and add and contribute. I think also a nature of those types of businesses is that you can actually have an impact on something smaller and early stage in its development and put your fingerprints on a business. I found that just intoxicating.
Yeah. So what was the first job you took, and how did you get it?
I was almost 19, and I was studying at the time, and was not enjoying studying at all. I think I need to go and find a job. So I literally opened up the paper back in those days, and you had classifieds, and I applied to a role in there for some sort of entry-level accounting role, and ended up taking this job in a business that had recently been listed, stock exchange, in and around debt collection and credit reporting. It was called Credit Corp.
Yeah.
So, goodness, this feels like dark ages. And in there found some really good mentors that were able to help me sort of build my craft and develop that language around, particularly around business performance and trying to, connect activity through to outcomes in a business. And that experience, whilst finance is not necessarily my strongest suit today, I think has really been useful to me, when you go going forward, and now working in sort of SaaS style businesses where metrics are so important. I think that's been, that was really a really good start for me.
And then, what came after those first couple of roles?
Well, I found myself getting a bit fidgety in New Zealand, and wanted to spread my wings a little bit, and my then girlfriend, now wife, and I took off to London, and I worked for a mobile carrier over there called Orange, which is one of the most innovative wireless brands in the world at that time. And there I really learnt about the power of challenger brands and just having a really bold, audacious vision. This is an extremely audacious, visionary business led by, again, another very extremely charismatic CEO. I fell in love with that. And it was the audacity of that business that really infected me, and I think it's really, some of the founder DNA started getting built around that experience.
Yep, yep. And how did working in London differ from being in New Zealand? You've got a faster paced city, you've got, a lot more people in London than in all of New Zealand. You've got a scale there that's very, very different. Like, what size? Do you recall what size Orange was at the time that you joined?
Yeah, I do. I think one feature of working in New Zealand is you're typically building for a market of 4 or 5 million people. Orange was based in the UK, but had a vision to be in 50 countries by 2005. So they weren't constrained by their own geography. They said, we're here building a global brand. And again, that level of ambition and audacity really opened my eyes to the idea that you can build businesses of significance that can really have an impact on a huge number of people.
Yeah, that must have been pretty inspiring. So that window of time there in London, were you with Orange sort of largely the whole time you were there, or what did that look like? What brought you back to New Zealand?
Yeah, no, I was. So it was interesting. It was a looking back now, it was a relatively short period of time. It was 2 years. In that time, the business itself got bought and sold twice. They were buying 3G licenses all around the world. I was fortunate enough to spend time working in that business in South Africa and India and the US and the Netherlands, Norway. And, as a kid from sort of small town New Zealand, being able to sort of, bounce around the world, dreaming up, new market entry strategies for this really exciting brand. I thought that was super exciting. But I mentioned my girlfriend Stephanie started feeling the pull of to go back to New Zealand. She was excited to build a family and build a home, and it's a common story. That's what got us to come back, and I came back sort of full of vigor and enthusiasm for I'm going to find my Orange. I've now seen the style of business that I think is exciting, and I came back full of energy, looking for a business like that.
It seems to be a reasonably common scenario. Kiwis that go off around the world, they're part of these incredible businesses, but at times then there's sort of the return home, and it can be a bit of it's not as exciting in New Zealand. Was that how it looked to you when you got back, or were you able to see businesses that stood out and excited you?
No, it was exactly that. I came back. I think I spent 5 or 6 months, literally looking for a role or a company that was going to be interesting. I was extremely disappointed going and doing landscaping for a couple of months just to keep myself active, and and ironically, it was humbling, but also very, very grounding for me as well, just to sort of get my feet back on the ground and think around, okay, well, if roles like this, like I've just had, don't exist in New Zealand, well, do I have to make one?
So what were the roles that you did end up kind of, jumping into for the next few years? What sort of things did you do?
Yeah, I took a short-term contract role with Spark, then Telecom, for a couple of months, sort of a little bit begrudgingly. Ended up staying there for 2.5 years, bouncing around a whole bunch of different things.
Okay, so they found some things to keep you engaged?
Yeah. And it's and then I left there and created my first startup, which was a consumer internet business that we bootstrapped, a friend and I. Then I went back into corporate land with Mighty River Power and did a lot of work on creating new energy businesses and brands for them. That was probably startup number 2 for me. We created a business within that called Glowbug, which was the world's first prepay smart meter enabled electricity brand.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Now you skipped over something there. You mentioned an initial startup. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Goodness, it feels so long ago now. So, a friend and I created a business, 20 plus years ago, called Tickle. And Tickle was an online photo products business. So at that time, like digital cameras were just starting to come out. We're all still on dial-up, right?
Yeah, okay.
And so we had this idea, well, like if people are out there taking photos, but they're not printing them out, and you can now do stuff with digital photos. Why don't we create some sort of website where you can like put those photos onto like into like books or calendars and make gifts with them. And of course, fast forward today, and there's dozens of these types of services around and super popular. There was nothing like that in New Zealand at the time, so we were the first in New Zealand, and then we released a bunch of products through that brand that were the first in like Southern Hemisphere as well. So it was a fun foray into like doing some innovative stuff around tech and starting to use the internet.
The lessons from that window, because it sounds like you were doing something that was cutting edge, but not all of these things kind of work out as you imagine. So totally. what did you walk away with from that experience?
Totally, yeah. No, there are a whole bunch. I think coming out of the Orange experience over in the UK, I had a huge amount of conviction that this concept had a lot of legs. It could scale to be something really, really large, and we came at it with that level of sort of conviction, which I think in the rearview mirror was a total mistake. It makes a lot more sense to be, experimental up front, to validate those hypotheses before you start writing big checks.
Gotcha.
I think the first thing that we did in that business was get out and start doing retail partnerships with nationwide chains like BP and video stores back in the day, so that we could put our technology into those places. And so it was very expensive model and very expensive lessons to learn as well, especially when we were bootstrapping it. We were using our own money. I was mortgaging the house. We ended up having to sell the house, which was...
How did that go down, family-wise, with having to sell your house?
With my wife?
Yeah.
She's stopped bringing it up weekly now, 20 plus years down the track. Yeah. No, the last conversation we had about that on that topic would have been maybe a month ago.
Yeah, okay.
This is oh my God. I skipped past that part of the story for a reason.
Yeah. That's why I was curious. So the partnerships you were setting up, you had to fund those. So if you sort of signed a nationwide deal, that you could put technology into these places, but you largely had to make that happen. And of course, there are limitations if 100%. You don't have a whole lot of venture capital funding or very deep pockets. And did you get any external funding during that, or was that very much kind of bootstrapped? No. It was your own money and any revenue you could bring in.
No, we didn't. So at the time we were we pitched the local, what was then the Ice Angels network here in Auckland, which at the time was so new that they hadn't actually made their first investment in anything at the time. Wow. So we would turn up to these events and there a bunch of guys sitting around drinking wine and paying very little attention to our pitch, more looking at each other to see who was the person that was going to go first. and none of them wanted to be the first to put their hand up for, presumably anything. So we bootstrapped ours from the start.
Wow.
And again, came at it with a whole bunch of vision. We created these sort of custom-built touchscreen kiosks that would rival what Air New Zealand uses in airports today. Yeah, we had a whole bunch of stuff that we did, which was super bold, super visionary, way ahead of its time, and sort of ridiculously over the top for the style of business that it was.
Yeah. Oh, that must be packed with lessons. Well, thanks for sharing some of that with us. Obviously, yeah, there's a bit of pain that these things leave, but also the learning is super valuable, right?
Totally.
Yeah. Anything more on that time at Mighty River Power sort of stands out?
Well, I think the business that we built within Mighty River Power, the Globug business, at least from my contribution to that, really benefited from the lessons out of Tickle and then Orange before that. But that still didn't stop me from making a bunch of mistakes in there. I think I brought a level of sort of founder energy to that business, which I think contributed to much of its early success, but also ended up disenfranchising me from a lot of the people in that business.
Okay.
And so I think something that I learned out of that experience was the importance of sort of taking people with you. It's not enough to be able to come in and see a bold new future and ignore all of the voices and personalities in the room in pursuit of that future.
Yes.
So I think that's important. I think one of the things that perhaps that was really impactful and important to me out of that was Globug was essentially serving families in New Zealand that lived week to week, for whom a monthly power bill, which can spike up and down, was totally unmanageable. And as a consequence, like when you send somebody a $200 or $300 power bill, that's often the thing that doesn't get paid, and then that creates a lot of sort of really negative consequences for families down the track when things like power starts getting disconnected and that etc. So with Globug, we saw an opportunity to replicate the model that I'd seen in the mobile phone industry, 5 years before, where people could go out there and put $20 on their power as they did with their phone and have enough credit to get them through the next couple of days because that's when the money was available. And just that concept, which, you look back, it's pretty simple, it's pretty practical. I think some of the best ideas are like that, in the rearview mirror. It just sort of seems obvious that you should be able to, treat your electricity supply in the same way that you would your mobile phone, like that. Really made a massive difference to thousands and thousands of families. And so in that experience, I saw the impact that technology had on the human condition. I remember I was at the gym, local gym here down the changing rooms one day, and this dude who was one of the trainers rocked up to me and said, "Oh, bro, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work for a power company." And he said, "Okay." He said, "Which one?" I said, "Oh, it's associated with that Mercury Energy." He said, "Oh, is it Globug?" I said, "Yeah, that's the one." And he thrust out his hand, to shake my hand. And he said, "Bro, we've got Globug at our house. That is the best thing. We love it." And in that moment, I had this shot of dopamine into the heart when I heard from a customer who not only bought and used this product that I'd had a hand in helping designing, but he was so excited about it. It really meant something to him and made a difference to his family.
That's
and
so good.
And that feeling totally stuck with me, and it was like a drug. I was like, I want more of that.
Yeah. Well, that's obviously pretty connected to your story. Now, because you started AskNicely, what was it, 2014? So what did you do in between Mighty River Power and AskNicely?
I did a short stint since working in a software firm that itself was reasonably entrepreneurial and had designs to build a number of different products. I think by the time that I was in that role, I had recovered from my earliest startup experience, the bootstrapped one.
Yeah.
I'd had a measure of success underneath a sort of an entrepreneurial experience with Globug, and now I was fully back on the Kool-Aid, ready to do my ready to do another one again.
Yeah.
And so AskNicely was sort of had to happen.
Yeah. So how did the dots come together? What was the thought patterns that you and your co-founder had to kick off AskNicely and to make that a thing that you'd dive into, boots and all?
Well, I think step number one is sort of a fait accompli that I needed to go and be part of the founding of another business. I knew there was no sort of happiness or fulfillment in sort of big corporate roles. Step number 2 was, in and of myself, I am insufficient. I go back to my father's observations, had no real practical skills in and of myself. I needed to partner with somebody else that could help build that, particularly from a technology perspective. So I needed to find my co-founder. And the next step after that is, what are we going to work on? So the idea was less important than, we need to go and build a business. I need to do it with somebody that can help complete me. That person for AskNicely was John Ballinger. And this is where the dots do start to connect, because I met John when I was building Tickle.
Yeah.
And he was like this gun for hire web mobile developer, that I had contracted to help me with rebuilding the Tickle engine. And through that experience, I discovered in him somebody that I had a sort of an uncommon chemistry with. We're both reasonably prickly in different ways. We're both acquired tastes, but we really clicked together. And in that moment, this is reversing up a few years, I knew that he was the guy that I wanted to go and build something with. And so I had a list by the end of 19 unstarted startup ideas, which is...
That's a good size list.
Oh, it's a terrible list, right? Right, because the only thing that matters is one startup idea that is started.
So
not the unstarted ones.
So how did you make a decision when you had 19 ideas, thought starters, however far you'd got with them? Then how did you whittle that down to one?
So John and I would have like an annual conversation of sorts. I would ring John up and say, "Hey, I've got an idea I want to bounce off you," and I'd drive around to his house and I would pitch him one of these ideas off this list, and his typical response is, "Aaron, that's a stupid idea. No one's going to want that. Go away." And I would scurry away with my tail between my legs, and like a year would pass, and then I would be excited by some new shiny idea and go around and pitch it. This process went on for 10 years. So we're talking, started in 2004. By 2014, I'm rocking up to his house to talk to him about the idea that became AskNicely.
Right. So you probably, in hindsight, you had a lot to thank him for before you even started AskNicely, because he helped you not waste your time on some daft idea.
100%. If I look back at those earlier ideas that I bounced off him, I was like, oh, thank God I didn't go after that.
Yeah.
But at the time, each one of them, I'm like, this is the one. And I remember going around to his house, and he told me quite some time afterwards, he said, "Man, I was getting sick of you coming around to my house telling me these stupid stories." And he said, that night that you came over, I was going to tell you, go, just stop. I don't have time for it. I don't need any more of these pictures from you. That's enough.
Oh, that's nuts.
Yeah.
But he listened.
Well, yeah. So we John lives in this little house in Ponsonby. We walked up to Ponsonby Road. We went to a what was then a little tapas bar. And we sat down, and I had this conversation with him, and I still remember the entire conversation, which I won't bore you with.
Well, give us a short version of what was the pitch for AskNicely.
Well, so I looked at him. I said, "Hey, John, what if we could do?" I said, "There's these things called like customer experience surveys, customer satisfaction surveys," and John's like, "Oh yeah, I've seen those things." He said, "They're terrible. They suck." I said, "Yeah, I know, they do suck." And I said, what if we could do to those long, awful surveys what Twitter did to blogging? Remember, this is 2014. Twitter was quite cool back then. Yeah. And he paused for a second, and he said, "I like it. I'll build it."
Wow, that was quick.
Well, yeah. Remember, this is like I'm jumping out of my skin at this point. This has been 10 years of me bouncing like these business ideas off him. And I said, "Awesome. When?" He said, "Tonight." He said, "Stop talking. You talk too much. I'm going home to start coding." So So this is a Tuesday night. It was raining outside. By that time, it was 11:30 p.m. He literally went home and started coding that night. The next day, he had the beginnings of a prototype, and that was how Ask Nicely started.
Wow. So before we delve into the rest of the story, maybe walk us through, what is Ask Nicely, today. How has it sort of varied, in simple terms from that initial vision of a really quick and easy way for people to be able to offer their feedback.
So, Ask Nicely today actually matches the same vision that we had when we started right back at the beginning, which is this idea of like helping businesses deliver the best experience to their customers. I think there is a truism today which wasn't as warmly embraced 10, 15 years ago, that it's the businesses with the best experiences that win. Not the best marketing or the best sales, but those that can actually deliver upon their promise. And at that time, and this is the thinking that went into Ask Nicely, we said, well, if experience is as, if not more important than marketing and sales, well, look, we've got these big stacks of software for marketing, and we've got big stacks of software for sales, but almost nothing for experience. Doesn't it make sense that at some point in the future, businesses will have some type of stack of software that helps make sure that every customer experience is awesome? And in terms of the start of Ask Nicely, we said, well, okay, well, if that's possible, if that's likely, one part of that stack, in fact, probably the most essential start of it, is helping people measure the customer experience. Let's figure out if we can tell whether a customer walked away happy or not. And if they did, they're more likely to come back for more. They're more likely to tell others about them, and the businesses with the best experience will win. And so the starting point for Ask Nicely was just creating a very simple way for businesses to measure the experience that they were delivering to customers. And we did it with the world's shortest, simplest, easiest survey, which was a single click on a rating and a single comment, which now is reasonably common. At the time, totally revolutionary and totally counter to the conventional wisdom around we must ask you 50 questions. And inflict a really painful experience upon you. So, we started as a very simple way to measure the customer experience. And what we found was, as businesses, and particularly service companies that had like lots and lots of frontline employees that were delivering the experience to their customers, they were coming back to us saying, hey, we love how well instrumented our customer experience is now. Like, we've got really tight measurement, real time, right across our business down to a team or even an individual level where we can measure the experience that everyone's doing. So we know exactly right across our company what the standard of experience that our customers are getting now is. We'd like to figure out how to make that number go up. And there's quite a difference, right, between like measuring a customer experience and actually improving it. And that was what Ask Nicely evolved into. We became a platform that helped motivate and reward frontline employees for making every customer experience awesome. And that's how the Ask Nicely platform evolved. It became a recognition and reward platform for frontline workers, which to me, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from Ask Nicely was the effect that feedback had on people at work.
Yes.
Like frontline workers in service companies typically don't get much feedback at all. And if they do, it's because something's gone wrong, which is not a great experience, right? It's tough being a frontline service worker. We saw this through COVID. Yeah. The amount of signs, particularly over the US, where you go into a store and you'd see a sign by the checkout saying, please be nice to our team today. Companies were understaffed, customers were stressed out. That stress would be reflected onto the frontline staff in these businesses, who themselves would get stressed and chances are not turn up tomorrow, and then this cycle got worse and worse. I think businesses really realized that how important it was to really support frontline workers so that they could turn up and be their best for every customer every day.
Yes.
And so what AskNicely became was a platform that helped businesses and managers within those businesses catch their people doing things right.
Fantastic.
All right, and we know that humans are best motivated by positive feedback. We've known this since we were at kindergarten when, we used to have the little star chart, and we did something well, you got a little star beside your name, and, we know how that felt. I still remember how that felt.
Yeah,
I still feel that way today.
Yeah, yeah.
And so AskNicely was delivering, and this is its dominant task for service businesses today, is to make sure that we're capturing all of the positive feedback from customers and delivering that through to frontline workers so they know that what they do matters. They know that it's something that the customer appreciates, that their boss appreciates, that leadership appreciates. And I think that's the thing, that fuel that gets them out of bed the next day to come and do it all over again.
So from those early ideas and that initial bit of code that was quickly put together overnight, how did you, I guess, plan out to build out the business from those initial ideas, and how closely would you say you were able to kind of follow those initial thoughts on what it might look like?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? So we had a vision from day one that AskNicely had the potential to be a global business, to be a global brand. We looked at this category around measuring customer experience to start with, and we said, well, actually, there's no leader in this space. You ask somebody, how do you go and get feedback from your customers, and people shrug their shoulders and go like, I don't know, is it like SurveyMonkey or something? When people answer a question with a question, it means there's no answer. And we saw a very real opportunity for AskNicely to become that answer. And so from day one, we had this intention around AskNicely becoming a market leader in the customer experience space, and a recognition that the US was going to be the market to win, for us to establish that leadership position, and from there to go and build a global brand. Now it's a gross oversimplification to get to this conclusion, but that's sort of what happened. We became the number one rated experience management platform on the planet. There's a platform called G2 where our customers would go and put reviews on there for AskNicely. We had the highest rating, well beyond the next best competitor, which was a business called Qualtrics, which was sort of at least 100 times bigger than us.
Yes.
Yet our customers liked ours better. And there's something meta about that, right? Because we were delivering an experience to our customers that was good enough that not only would they hang around and continue to buy our product, but they would go and talk about it on review sites like that. And that's essentially the promise that we made to our customers. If you buy our software, it's going to help you deliver an experience that your customers will come back for more and tell others about. And so there's a nice little duality around making a dream come true for your customers that can also come true for you.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So how did you make that happen? Because you'd learned some lessons earlier in terms of that these things can be expensive. So what was the journey of getting from you and John to this great global business? How did you fund it? How did you decide who to bring in for the journey?
Sure.
How did that look like in those earliest years?
Well, right back at the start, I think, and taking a lesson out of the previous business, we worked very early on getting validation from customers that not what we built, but what we wanted to build would actually solve a problem for them. So before we had anything like any software, I was taking the concept of it and a screenshot that John had built on that first night.
Perfect.
I shopped it around 12 different businesses of all different shapes, sizes, and flavors here in New Zealand, and said, "Look, we're thinking of building something like this, if we built this, would you be interested? Would you pay money for it? And of those 12, 11 said yes.
Wow.
And the 12th said, I bought something like that last week. and that just, I think it just really validated that this was a problem for companies, and they were interested in some form of solution to it. Whether that was ours or not, we didn't know that yet. But it really validated that it was worth leaning into. And then I went to, at the time, John was still doing a bunch of contract, web and mobile development for other people, and AskNicely was sort of a nights and weekends thing for him. And I was now fully convicted that this was a real thing, and I needed to get him to work on it full time. So I went to a friend of mine that I'd done some work with previously and said, "Hey, I need you to buy this product." He said, "Well, you haven't really got anything to show me. There's no software here." I said, "Yeah, but I need this guy to work on it full time. Can you write me a check for $3,000? And we will build this product that I've just described to you." He wrote the check on the spot. I took it back to John and said, "Look at this. We've got our first customer." He immediately picked up the phone, rang all of his clients, and fired every one of them on the spot and said, "I'm building a startup."
Wow.
And so that was the moment that he went all in on it.
Yep.
And that's when life started to get a bit serious. Like, well, now this is a real thing. He and I both had Auckland mortgages. We both had 2 young kids. So this thing needed to fly. And I guess the other learning from previous experience was, bootstrapping isn't a favourable path. My wife was not going to endorse that, so we had to go and raise some money.
Yeah.
And so we, with that early conviction of we had less than 4 or 5 customers, we went and raised a tiny, ridiculously small angel round, which was the start of our capital journey.
Right, but that was enough to get you started, because
Get started.
you ended up doing how many capital raises through your journey?
I'm not sure I could count them all. I think I've blanked out a number of them, but the dollar figure adds up to $50 million US that we raised into that company.
And when you look back over that journey, what sticks out most as the hardest time? You obviously, as you're saying, 50 million, that's a pretty substantial amount of capital to get invested, but you don't go asking for that sort of money unless you need it. Yeah. So there must have been some stresses and pressures along the way.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you ask about the hard times. I'm trying to think of which were the easy ones.
Yeah, okay.
So the whole thing's hard, right? I mean, it really is. It really is. I think I think that what changes is the flavor of hardness, right? I think startups graduate through different stages, and each stage has a different flavor of hard about it. And that's the thing that's kind of frustrating about the whole startup journey is like you have some success in a given stage, and you feel like you've cracked some code, and you go into the next stage, you're like, oh, that code's irrelevant to the new code. Right? No, that code doesn't work in the new stage.
Yes.
And so in some ways, you always feel like you're new at this, and it was certainly the case for me at AskNicely through the last 5 or 6 years of the journey. I'm sitting there with a CEO title on, feeling like the least experienced person at the table. We'd always try to recruit people into the executive team that had mileage on the clock in businesses that were, the stage after or even later stage than us, so that we could take learnings out of those experiences and pour them into AskNicely.
Yeah.
And again, I'm the one that feels the most, naive and least experienced through it. The way that we look to address that was right from a very early stage, making sure that we were getting feedback from people that we really respected and trusted and had seen more rodeos than we had. And so right back from that first angel round that we did, John O'Hara, really respected entrepreneur here in Auckland, came on board, backed these 2 clowns sitting in a garden shed, to build something worthwhile. And he was very much that first believer. It was his belief in us and endorsement of us that I think made it attractive and interesting for a bunch of other people to become investors or become involved in the business in some way.
Yeah.
And so, I think most important in AskNicely's journey for me was the co-founder choice in John.
Yes.
And then secondly, the people that we were able to work with to help steer and guide the business early on, like John O'Hara. And then the second significant name to come on board was Mike Carden.
Yes.
And back at that time, we're going back to 2014, there's a very, very short list of people that had gone and built a software as a service business and seen that journey right through to the end to some form of exit.
Yeah.
And I think at that time, Mike would have been one of 3, 4 people in the country that had that experience, and a few years. But I was able to share the concept of AskNicely with him, and he said, "I think that's got some legs." He came on as a investor advisor, went onto the board, and then was super impactful through the journey of AskNicely right through to Series B.
So some really key elements there in terms of people that backed you and supported you, and you were able to lean into right through the journey.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then tell us about stepping back from AskNicely.
Yeah, go right back to the start. When John and I were sitting in this, literally sitting in his garden shed, talking around the fact that AskNicely has the potential, and we have this conviction that it can become a global brand and a market leader. Right back at that sort of daydreaming stage for us, we looked at each other and said, I don't know, are we the right people to be running a global business? And the good news was we didn't need to answer that question at that stage. We just needed to be the guys that started that. But I think philosophically, we also recognized there might be a stage at which, if the business fulfilled that potential, that maybe there's a stage at which it outgrows us. And maybe there's a moment at which we need to sort of pass that baton on for somebody to take it and help it reach the next stage of its potential. And we tried to come up with we developed this ritual to, I guess, check in on where we were at with regard to, are we right for this? Am I the right person for this next phase? And so what we would do is we would get together at the start of each year in January. Of course, it's summertime here in New Zealand, so we would go down to a local beach and we would spend 3, 4, 5 hours together, checking in with each other and trying to look around the corner and say, okay, what is this next year going to ask of us? We know it's going to be different from the year that we've just come out of. And given what we think we need to achieve and what that year is going to require of us, am I the right person for that job? And we would give each other permission to give us feedback on whether I thought John was up for it and whether he thought I was up for it. And then what would need to be true for us to justify the seat that we have. And so we would give ourselves, we'll give each other really constructive feedback on what we would, the upgrades that we would need to perform on ourselves to be able to, lean into that next phase. And we got to, goodness, I can't remember how many years in, but there was a point at which John said, look, it's starting to become a lot more about sort of, leadership and governance, and I'm not doing much coding anymore, and I really miss the coding, and I like building, not less interested in this leadership stuff. And, essentially sort of opted out of continuing. We were able to manage our way through that, which is, it was a very, very tricky time. But
that would be easier said than done.
Yeah. But in some ways we were able to sort of, plan ahead and put a transition plan in place. So, I mean, that was a really, really healthy ritual for he and I, sort of founded feedback. Yeah. But then minus a founder, I then needed to figure out, well, who am I going to be able to have that conversation with going forward, such that I can, continue to be sort of fit for the role and fit for the phase that I'm in. So I ended up going and getting a executive CEO coach in Portland, where I was living, with my family at that time, where the majority of the executive team was. And that was transformational for me. And we were able to be a lot more proactive about my development there. It's actually when I first started doing 360 feedback to basically get visibility of my blind spots and be proactive around them. And long story bearable, we'd raised a big B round, raised a lot of money, and scaled the business to where I think we had about 70 people in the company at that time. And I had lost the level of connection that I had with each person that I really enjoyed and valued when the company was sort of 30 or 40 people.
Yeah.
And I was starting to feel less effective as a leader. And so that became one of the signals that went into the conversation around, is it time to find a new leader for AskNicely?
Yeah. So how did you progress forward from that point?
Yeah, well, I think we've really thought deeply around what's the nature of the skill set and the profile that's going to be the sort of the best CEO for AskNicely going forward. And so Tony Ward, who's in that role, no relation, and Tony is a Canadian national, but married a Kiwi girl that he met when he was visiting Auckland as part of the 1990 Commonwealth Games. It's the most awesome story.
Yeah.
So he falls in love with this girl, but also falls in love with Auckland and New Zealand. Ends up coming to study at the University of Auckland, and then spent time working with Spark, Microsoft, LinkedIn, SurveyMonkey, Dropbox. So a bunch of wonderful technology brands here, predominantly in a sort of sales and country leadership roles, which is just wonderful for AskNicely. He ended up being the head of North America for Xero. So we've got this person who's lived this US, New Zealand lifestyle, understands both cultures deeply, and has this sales leadership pedigree from some of the world's best technology brands. So I feel super fortunate to have somebody with that profile taking the reins of AskNicely going forward, and he's just doing phenomenally.
Brilliant.
So I still sit on the board of AskNicely. I exited operationally last year, and that's given me permission to go and work on the new thing. Unfortunately, I still suffer from the startup gene. My wife would prefer that this wasn't the case, but it is what I am. So it's time to go and build a new business, and that's what brings us to the company that I'm working on today called Huckleberry.
Yeah. So tell us how that came about.
So well, Huckleberry is it's the world's first voice AI 360 feedback platform. And so there's some really obvious overlap between Huckleberry and AskNicely on a number of levels. So firstly, it's feedback again. It's not customer feedback. Now we're talking about feedback from your teammates. And it's directly informed from, I guess, much of my experience going through the AskNicely journey and thinking around, how do I upgrade myself over time? How do I see my blind spots that I have and be able to take action upon those so that I can increase my impact in my role? And that in most businesses is a really painful process. Very similar to what customer feedback was 10 years ago before AskNicely came on the scene.
Yeah.
People send out these long surveys to all their teammates. Typically happens once a year. So, for 364 days of the year, there is silence. You hear nothing. And then at the end of the year, maybe some of your teammates suffer the indignity of filling out these terrible, awful long surveys with ratings and sliders in them. And it's a process that just nobody loves. Nobody loves providing feedback. Nobody loves being a manager that has to wade through raw verbatims and then turn that into something that's not going to traumatize people in their team and the poor person that has to receive it. And I just look at that and think, oh my God, feedback is so essential to the human condition. It's literally how we evolve. All the highest performing athletes in the world leveled on the feedback that's typically delivered to them via a coach. And yet, in a professional sense, the way that we deal with feedback is these terrible long surveys. So Huckleberry is here to save the world from that process. And we have created a way where people can talk rather than type, which takes 3 or 4 minutes rather than 20 or 30. And then there is no manager or HR involved in the process. The feedback goes directly to the individual, but thanks to AI in a format that's only going to be helpful rather than hurtful to the individual. And then Huckleberry has a particular innovation to it, which is unique in the sense that feedback travels with you in your career. You can take it from role to role and from company to company, essentially build your reputation based on what your teammates say about you.
What a brilliant idea. That's great.
Well, let's see.
Let's see.
Yeah. So we're less than 2 months into that journey. We're right back at the start of the startup journey, which is super exciting. And now we've got lessons from, 3 or 4 other businesses to go and pour into this. So let's see if we've learned anything from that feedback.
Oh, I'm sure you have. So for folks that are curious about Huckleberry, is there a product they can sign up for yet? Where are you at?
Yeah, you can. So for anybody at work, you can go to gethuckleberry.com and sign up for free and use Huckleberry to get feedback from your teammates. You don't have to insert your credit card. Your company does not need to have a subscription to it. So in this sense, it's a little bit like LinkedIn. We want to make sure that all the world's workers have access to feedback, good quality feedback when they need it, so they don't have to wait for feedback day inside their company. And then businesses are able to subscribe to Huckleberry to get integration with their systems and be able to roll processes out at scale across hundreds or thousands of their employees.
Brilliant. Well, really appreciate your time, Aaron. Great to hear some of your story, and I think listeners will be very curious to follow the Huckleberry journey following your incredible success with AskNicely.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Paul. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Cheers.
All right.
Well, I hope you really enjoyed hearing from Aaron Ward and that you got a lot out of it. The New Zealand Business Podcast is proudly brought to you by One New Zealand and Gorilla Technology. Gorilla is the information technology services firm supporting astute mid-size and smaller organisations in getting the very best out of technology whilst minimising cybersecurity risks. Get in touch to find out about technology and cybersecurity audits, along with software selection and implementation services. Be sure to listen in to our other episodes featuring many of New Zealand's most successful leaders, including founders such as Rod Drury of Xero, Cecilia, and James Robinson of My Food Bag, Sir Peter Beck of Rocket Lab, Brooke Roberts of Sharesies, Sir Michael Hill, and many, many more. And because a rising tide lifts all boats, you can contribute to lifting New Zealand's success just by sharing a favourite episode or two with a friend or colleague. Thanks for listening in. This is Paul Spain signing out. I'll catch you on the next episode, and look out for our new episodes coming at you right through the Christmas break. Cheers.
The New Zealand Business Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, your strategic and proactive IT partner.